6. In Jersey City, lying on a rank bed with a filthy mattress, Thomas Hoban stirred uneasily in his sleep. The dreams didn't come so often, but they still came, and always the same. Captain Thomas Hoban was seated in a big command chair. Few screens above him, clear steel glass canopy in front. Not that you get to see much in space, not even in the asteroid belt, but even the biggest spaceship is small in terms of space for humans, and you get to appreciate even a view of nothingness. It's better than being sealed up in a duralloy cocoon without any vision except for what the TV monitors can offer. The Dolomite, a good ship with an old but reliable atomic drive, but also recently fitted with tachyonic gear for multi-parse jumps, was currently on a local run within the solar system, tooling around, doing a good job here, a job there, trying to pick up some money for the owners. Then they got the signal that took them to Lea 2 in the asteroids. Lea was a fueling base owned by Universal Obsidian, but open to all ships. It was a refueling spot. It even had a kind of cafe. Only a dozen seats and a menu like you'd expect at a place that hired their cooks by how little they would steal and cut costs by never bringing in fresh provisions. Not that fresh produce comes easy in the asteroids. It costs too much to make special runs with your iceberg lettuce. After leaving Lea, Hoban had taken the Dolomite to position A23 in the asteroids. That was the location for the Angel Works, a refinery on its own slab of rock, where a robot work crew purified metals and rare earths mined elsewhere in the asteroids. A23 was located in one of the densest parts of the cluster. You had to navigate at slow speeds and with care. But who didn't know that? And Hoban was a careful man. He didn't let his second-in-command do the job for him. Even though Gil was an android and a top pilot and navigator, Hoban did it himself, and he did it well. In any event, no one had any complaints about him before he came to A23. His job on A23 was to take a big metals hopper into tow and bring it to the Lunar Reclamations facility. Taking it up was no small job. It was a big mother, too big to fit into the Dolomite's hold. But of course, the asteroid it was perched on had negligible gravity. So there was no difficulty in pulling the hopper away from the surface once the magnetic clamps that held it to its massive base plate were released. Hoban's crew, by all accounts, were trained men. It should have been a piece of cake. The trouble was, they weren't really a trained crew. There were 3 Malays aboard who spoke no English and only understood the simplest commands. That usually worked out all right, but not this time. It had never been proven, but one of those Malays must have gotten confused working in the lowest bay. Somehow, he or someone had missed the tow line entirely and had locked the fuel line feeder into the coupling winch. The next thing Hoban knew, the feeding mechanism had been jerked out of the atomic pile, which had shut down automatically, leaving him floating in space without main power. This wasn't the first time a spacecraft had lost the main engine. Gil estimated 6 hours to repair it. Meantime, the backup accumulators and the steering jets would provide enough propulsion to get back to A23 so they could pick up the 5 crewmen who had gone down to manhandle the cargo ties in the position. At least, that's what should have happened, or so it was claimed in the court inquiry later. Instead, hoping had turned the ship toward Luna and got away as fast as he could. He claimed afterward that there was a lot more wrong than just losing an engine. Down on A23, an inexperienced crew member had accidentally pulled the interlocks on the atomic pile that kept A23 running. The damn thing was going critical, and there was no time to do anything but run for it, leaving the 5 crewmen on A23 to their fate. Hoban had to make a quick decision. He calculated that the pile was going to blow up in 3 minutes. If he stayed around or moved in closer, the blast would take him with it. Even a Class 4 Duralloy hull wasn't built for that kind of treatment. And anyhow, non-military spacecraft were usually built of lighter gauge metal than the fighting ships. It was pandemonium aboard the Dolomite. There was a crew of 20 aboard, and 5 of them were down at A23 with the blast coming up on them in minutes. Half of the remaining crew had wanted the captain to ignore the lapse time indicator, ignore the risk, and go back to pick up the men. The other half wanted him to blow off what remained of battery power and get out of there as fast as his jets would take him. The crew had burst into the control room, hysterical and entirely out of order, and they had begun to come to blows right there while Hoban was trying to con the ship and Gill into attending to the navigation. Letting those men in there had been the captain's first mistake. Crewmen were not allowed in officer country except by specific invitation. When a crewman trespasses, shipboard code says he should be punished immediately. If Hoban had ordered Gill to seize the first man to come in and put him into the crowded little locker below decks that served as jail space, the others might have had second thoughts. Crews obey strong leadership, and Hoban's leadership at this point was decidedly weak. It was in the middle of that shouting and writhing mass of people that Hoban had come to his decision. "Open the accumulators. Get us out of here, Mr. Gill." That had shut everybody up, since the acceleration alarm had gone off and they had to get back to their own part of the ship and strap down while the Fox gravity was still in operation. It was Hoban's hesitation that had almost set off the men. But once he'd made up his mind, things were better. The question was, had he made the right choice? The jury decided there was reason enough to believe that Hoban had panicked, had not thought through his position, had not properly calculated the risk. The jury's report said he had had more than enough time and could have gone in for the men without undue risk to the ship. It would have been cutting it a little fine, but in the atmosphere of the trial, men didn't think about that. They didn't really ask themselves what they would have done in Hoban's shoes. They just knew that 5 crewmen were dead and the company was liable. But the question was, under which clause of the insurance contract was the company liable? If what had happened was beyond anyone's power to change, that was one thing. But if it was due to pilot error or poor judgment, then the company had less direct liability. Guess which the jury went for. Spaceship pilots were important men, like star athletes. And most of them had, in addition to solid abilities, good to excellent connections. Hoban didn't have any of that, just top marks in his class throughout the university and space school after that. He was the corp's token poor boy, proof that anyone could make it in the corps if he was smart and diligent. But when it came right down to it, after the accident, the company didn't want to pay out on a higher figure of the insurance and Hoban didn't have any friends in high places to keep a watch over his interests. Juries had been known to be bribed, and Biofarm had been known to bribe them. The case had faded quickly from the news. There were lots of other things to get excited about. No one was even interested in doing a vid special on a Hoban case. But if they'd looked into it, they might have been surprised.